Okay, so hello, I'm Vanessa Campanacho, and I'm going to talk about the gender publication patterns in one of the major bioanthropological journals. So scientific publications is one of the major venues we use to share our research with other scientists and to some extent with the public. But the number of publications and the number of citations can influence a scientist's career progression. But it's usually embedded into a toxic publish or perish culture. Publishing also has some structural barriers that can disadvantage women and minorities professionally. Like, for example, women's manuscripts can face more criticism, and this is going to slow down the publishing process. Women's research contributions tend to be more overlooked for authorship than men, and women's works tend to be less cited than men's works. So in this research, I'm comparing women's publishing and citation patterns versus men in the American Journal of Biological Anthropology since its inception in 1918 to 2023. So more than a century. This journal, for those that are not familiar, is associated with one of the major bioanthropological associations in the world, the American Association of Biological Anthropologists. So in terms of materialism methods, I collected the bibliometric data set from Dimensions database. Although gender was analyzed as a binary variable for first and last authors, gender is not binary. But there is a limitation in the analysis of first names, as those are don't encompass the full spectrum of gender identities. So it limited my analysis. I choose only to do the analysis for first and last authors because first tend to be the scholars that made most of the work and put a great contribution in the writing of the manuscript and tend to be more of the early career researchers. While the last authors, it tends to be a common practice to be more of the senior scholars, the full professors, independently of their contribution to research or the manuscript. In terms of analysis, I calculated a women's men ratio in terms of the number of publications and for the number of citations. I did some descriptive and non-parametric statistics to analyze publishing and citation patterns. I also use the VOS viewer software to visualize co-recurring networks of research collaboration between countries of affiliation and research topics. So I analyzed 1,158 papers. And in here we have the frequency of papers per decade for the first authors. And we can see that even though women started publishing in 1918, it was in a much lower number than men. We can only see more recently in 2010 to 2019 that women slightly publish more than men. And the following 4 years, we see women publishing more than men. And this is only for the first authors, but there is a significant difference in publication frequency between the two genders. This is for last authors, which can correspond to senior positions, more to senior positions, not always, but can be indicative of such. And we see a significant difference in the frequency of publications between the two genders, where men publish more than women. Then I look at the collaboration frequency between the first and last authors. And this is assuming that the lost authors have a more senior position. So in terms, when the woman was the last author, she slightly collaborated more with men, but the frequencies are quite similar. So in a way, she similarly collaborated with women and men. But when we look at men as senior authors, they collaborated more with men. 65.2% of men collaborated with other men than with women. In terms of citations, there is significant difference where men are significantly more cited than women were, independently of the position they had in authorship. And here we can visualize the co-authorship networks among countries of affiliation. So I'm talking about collaboration in terms of countries of affiliation. And this is for women as first authors. To be expected, there is more collaborations happening in the United States, but we can see that this has expanded worldwide, even though after the United States, we have more prominence in the United Kingdom, Canada, Spain, France, so a bit more prominence in Europe. But it is to be expected that most of the collaborations happen in the United States because this is an American journal. Then when we look at men as first authors, it's very similar to women as first authors. Most of the collaborations are happening among institutions affiliated in the United States. But then when we compare the two, it seems that women as first authors are having a more international collaborations compared to men. And then very similar to women as last authors and compared to men as last authors. It's very similar patterns. In terms of the research topic, they collaborated more. It's very similar between women and men. This is for first authors. But there was a bit of a difference where women tend to collaborate more about paleontology topics, while men tend to collaborate more on paleoanthropological topics. And the same we can see for last authors. So in terms of final comments, we saw a positive trend in publications by women, more equity, for first authors, which it's not surprising as we think that most of the graduate students are women. And the current editor-in-chief of the journal is also a woman. So it's not surprising to see this recent increase in publications by women as first authors. But the study does show there is still gender inequality in the journal publishing. And I'm going to say that this suggests gender inequality in publishing in bioanthropology. I'm going to expand this study to include other journals, and including the International Journal of Paleontology and the Journal of Human Evolution, to see if it also has the same patterns that I saw here, if there is more women publishing in paleontology and more men publishing in paleoanthropology. So it will be interesting to see that. Now I have to talk about the reality that we are facing here, especially in the Western countries, where we are facing a lot of extensive cuts in funding and university job cuts. And this is going to have a very negative impact, mostly in women and minorities, because we are the groups that tend to occupy more precarious positions within the academia. So this is probably going to affect the number of publications we have in the future. So it's something for us to continue to monitor. Since this is a short talk, I'm not going to give extensive suggestions for what we can do, but I want to make 3 points. We women need to continue to form supporting network groups to elevate each other. We do not need to continue to follow this hyper competition. We do not need to follow old structures of oppression based on toxic masculinity and patriarchy. As women, we have resistance, we're resistant, we have empathy, we can forge new paths that is going to help everyone. Not just women and not just minorities, but inclusive men, because men also suffer with toxic masculinity. Even though it gives them power, they also suffer. And very sincerely, I think as women, we can forge a new path for equity for everyone, no matter our gender, no matter the pigmentation of our skin, no matter our sexual orientation. That is not to say there are women that have embedded misogyny and support toxic masculinity. But I think we can forge a new path. And so we need those groups to ally ourselves because we are stronger together. Another thing is professional associations may need to forge new paths to try to fund more research projects for women and minorities. I know that professional associations such as AABA, they may struggle financially, but they can think outside of the box. They can maybe sell webinars like $5, $10, where everyone worldwide can attend. They're accessible, but they can get funds to fund research, donations. So we need to think outside of the box. And the reason why I'm putting more emphasis on professional associations is because, and maybe this is cynical of me, and maybe I'm making a generalized assertion, but I do not believe universities will help us diametric to what we need. Universities are showing they're complicit. Universities are producers of inequality. That's why we have so much precarity among women academics, among minorities academics, associated with universities. And so I'm not expecting us to help as much as we need. But professional associations can only help us if we support them as well. My third point, which is more of an appeal, is there's a call for a new editor-in-chief of the American Journal of Biological Anthropology, and it's open until the end of the month. So my call is, please, women, apply, 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 apply. This journal has existed for more than a century, and it has had 15 editors-in-chief. And from those 15, only 2 were women. And both of the women were white. The current editor-in-chief is Dr. Trudy Turner. She's been doing wonderful work. As you saw, there's a positive trend with authorship for women as first authors. We need to continue that momentum, and I think another woman as an editor-in-chief can help in that regard, especially if it's a woman of color. We need to have the first woman of color as the editor-in-chief of this important journal.
Vanessa, I'm sorry to interrupt, despite this is super interesting and a brilliant way to close, but
yes,
you're way beyond the time. Sorry.
I finished. Thank you.